Hi, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about assistive technology for early intervention. And on this slide is the Tekl logo. It's a little owl in black and white, and it says Tekl, Technology for Our Whole Lives, Institute on Disabilities at Temple University. And that's us. So here's a little bit more about us. This is me on the left. I'm wearing a shirt that says the future is accessible. My name is Alana Raffel. I'm an occupational therapist and an AT specialist at Tekl. And Kim and Haley, I'll let you intro yourselves.
Hi, I'm Kim Singleton. I am a speech language pathologist, but I'm also the director of AT programs the director of Tekl and other AT programs at the Institute on Disabilities at Temple. And I worked in early intervention for several years before I took this position. So this is very, very like a homecoming for me.
And I'm Strickler. I am a speech language pathologist, and I am the AAC, or Augmentative and Alternative Communication Services Coordinator for the Tekl team.
So that's us. We have our emails up here. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out. If you need anything, we'll also put them in the chat at the end just so you have them. But feel free to always take a screenshot and get in touch with us. All right, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about some basic Tekl information, some assistive technology and AAC basics, assistive technology and the IFSP, some resources that we have in our lending library at Tekl, some options that we have through Create Together, which is our fabrication program at Tekl, where we make things. We're going to talk about funding for AT and AAC as well. And then at the end, we're happy to answer any questions that you have. And if we have time, maybe do a little app show and tell. Kim and Haley have a lot of cool apps that they're happy to share with you. All right, Kim, I'll pass this to you.
So I don't know who has heard of Tekl. It's quite possible that you've heard of PIAT, Pennsylvania's Initiative on Assistive Technology. We changed the name about three years ago from PIAT to Tekl. We are a program at the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, but we are an outward-facing program. So we don't really do too much work at for Temple or at Temple, but we are a statewide program. So every state has an Assistive Technology Act program. This is a program that's run with federal dollars to make sure that everybody with disabilities has the ability to explore, discover, try, and get the tools and technology that they need to live their best lives. In Pennsylvania, for over 30 years or close to 30 years, PIAT, and now Tekl, has been Pennsylvania's Assistive Technology Act program. So that's kind of the big project that we have, is doing this work. We do it by having 9 different regional centers across Pennsylvania. We here at Temple are the regional center for the 5 counties around here. But then we partner with other organizations that are Centers for Independent Living or United Cerebral Palsy Centers to do the work that we contract with them to do around assistive technology in their area. So that's kind of the brief history of Tekl and how we got started. And if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or we can go on. So Tekl has a lot of different programs and projects. Some of them are under the umbrella of Pennsylvania's Assistive Technology Act program, but some of them are freestanding that in the work that we do. Probably one of the things you might want to know about is our lending library. It has been around for a very long time. It was, in my opinion, when I was doing this work, I found it very cumbersome to use. I found having to trek down to Temple to borrow a device and then remembering to take it back. We have thousands of AT devices available to borrow. And we can drop ship them to you directly from our centralized inventory. So they show up at your house. You can use them for 9 weeks and then you ship them back to us. And that's probably one of the biggest and most helpful things that we can do for folks doing the work of their early intervention. We also do one-on-one demonstrations. If you have a kiddo that you're wondering about, we can sit down with you, the family, the kiddo, and figure out what might work. In that, well, I'll get, there's so much. We also do the I Can Connect program. It's a federal program from the FCC, and it's to help people who experience both vision loss and hearing loss get the kind of communication equipment that they need. It's a robust program. It's based on income. You must have both vision loss and hearing loss. And through that program, we can get a lot of different equipment to help you communicate better. Because it's through the FCC, it has to be around distance communication. We do a lot in the area of emergency preparedness and emergency response. We've been very busy in that area, as you can probably imagine, over the last 15 months. We help people figure out their own emergency plan. So kind of individual one-on-one emergency planning for people who request it. We also work with a lot of the organizations. Actually, the Assistive Technology Act programs got very involved in emergency prep and emergency response because of Hurricane Katrina. When Hurricane Katrina happened, a whole lot of people were separated from the tools and technology they needed. They were airlifted out, or they were put on boats and taken out without wheelchairs, without communication devices, without hearing aids, without reachers, without canes and walkers. And so we kind of came in as a national program and tried to get stuff to them that they needed. And that's how emergency preparedness and response activities started being more and more of what we do. As an aside, our team at Tekl has been working with all of the, or many of the vaccination clinics in Pennsylvania around making sure that people have access to translation services on an iPad if they need it, communication boards. We have a sensory kit at the big FEMA and citywide vaccination clinics. And so we do that kind of stuff. Aac Community is another offshoot of Tekl, and it is an effort to have everybody who is non-speaking and people who support non-speaking individuals to get the resources and community around augmentative and alternative communication. And that work, that has a separate website called aaccommunity.net, where people are active on there. We have a blog that goes on and that kind of thing. ACEs is a special program for young adults who use augmentative communication. It's been going on. Last summer would have been our 30th anniversary had we been able to have it. It's where young adults come to the Temple campus and live there for 2 weeks and learn all about and think all about what it is they might want to do in the future, how they can advocate for themselves, any tweaks to their augmentative communication system. We have lots of folks that it's a pretty robust program. We also get, in our reuse program, we get a lot of things that across the Commonwealth, we collect gently used items. We clean them up and sanitize them, and then rehome them to people who need the items that they can't get and they're either free or at a very, very low cost. We do that work through reuse partners all across the Commonwealth. And so if people are looking for something that they don't want to buy, particularly if it's something that somebody might stop needing, then we can often help respond to that gap. I'm going to Create Together is an initiative we started several years ago. There's a whole lot of folks out there that love to tinker and the makers movement is doing nothing but getting larger and larger. And so this is a program where we take people who use AT and people who like to tinker and make AT, and we bring them together and create relationships so that people can get what they need. This is really happening more and more in a lot of different areas. It's happening in pharmacy, where people are getting designer solutions in their medicine. Well, we're also creating designer solutions for people through our Create Together program. We also can make things that are usually very expensive in a very low cost way. One of the things that comes to mind are switches. Switches can be really, really expensive. And we can make them very inexpensively. So we try to do that kind of work. I think one of the coolest things that we've done recently is we made a floor wheelchair for somebody that was really kind of cool, and maybe there's a picture of it later in the seminar. Andrew raised his hand. Let's see. Yes, Andrew, you are unmute. You can unmute yourself.
Is it not working?
Yeah.
On my part, sorry.
Hi.
That was a mistake on my part. I was trying to adjust.
Oh, okay, no worries, no worries.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Kim. I'm just trying to make sure the interpreter is still visible. So I pinned Sarah, but I didn't know if that video. Oh, so there's two interpreters. There's Sarah and Charity. Sarah is interpreting right now. I'm going to remove the spotlight from Charity at the moment.
Sounds good.
Do you, if someone could just chime in, let me know, do you see Sarah, the interpreter? Okay, so let's.
I see you.
No, we see you. Somebody, okay. Do not see Sarah. Okay, Haley.
Yeah, so if people are having difficulty viewing the interpreters as well as the speakers, you might have to play around with your Zoom controls. So there should be a button on my screen. I'm personally using a Mac with the updated one. You should be able to change it so it says, instead of just standard and highlighting the person who's speaking, you can change it to side by side and do gallery. That way you're going to be able to view all of the speakers as panelists, as well as all of the interpreters. So then if you see one of the interpreters kind of close out or hide her video, that then you'd be able to choose the other interpreter if the thing is not working. Like us as the panelists controlling the pinning, you can also pin them individually. So on my screen, I have both Sarah and Charity pinned, as well as myself, so I don't lose track of my video. It kind of overrides the Zoom pins by the hosts, if that makes sense.
For everyone's convenience too, I did pin the new ASL interpreter. So I did pin Sarah. So now Sarah is on the front of everyone's gallery screen no matter what. But I think too, you can absolutely personalize your settings.
Yeah, some people are saying that it may be a Chrome issue. Some people aren't able to switch between speaker and gallery mode. Okay, so someone's saying Sarah is pinned. Okay, well, that's good, as long as you can see the interpreter. If you need the interpreter and aren't able to see Sarah, please let us know. Tom and Alana, we can also give you, yeah, that's fine. Charity and Sarah, if you want to give us a cue when you're switching, then we can make sure the right person is pinned. That might be helpful. Thank you. All right, yes, again, if you need access to the interpreter or if anyone is not able to see, please let us know. Sarah found a solution. If you toggle to full screen, the ASL interpreter is visible. Yeah, so feel free to like keep chiming in and helping each other out. It looks like people are seeing Sarah, which is great. Awesome. Wow, you'd think like a year and a half into this, we would like have it down really, but we're still figuring it out day by day, no worries. Thanks for bearing with us and helping us figure it out, everyone. All right, so we're gonna do a little.
There was a question, Alana.
Okay, great.
In early intervention, do you just do one-to-one consults in Philadelphia? I also work in Chester and Delaware counties and was wondering if you go into those counties as well. If so, who would we contact? So the way we're working now is we do, as everybody does, we do a lot virtually. And Chester and Delaware, Bucks, Montgomery, and Philadelphia counties, we are the Aac regional center for all 5 of those counties. So you would contact Tekl to schedule a demonstration. And at this point, it would probably be online. So we would talk to you and we would figure out what it is you're looking to explore and then work with you to pull some things together to show you some options. That's kind of what's happening now, if that helps.
Cool. Yeah,
Okay.
and so it's a good reminder that we, while we're housed at Temple and we're mostly in Philly, that's just because we are, but that, Tekl is the umbrella organization for all of the Commonwealth. And we do have those ATRCs and local places, but the work we do is for everyone in Pennsylvania. All right, so I wanted to do a quick poll to see who's here. We'll see if this works. So I'm gonna launch this poll and it asks, in what capacity do you work? Physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech language pathologist, teacher or educator, special instructor, or other? So I'm gonna launch this poll. We'll see what happens. So it should pop up on your screen. Awesome. So far we have SLPs are, oh, no, wait.
Special instructors.
Special instructors are at the top. 71 special instructors, 54 SLPs, 34 OTs, 26 PTs, 2 teacher and educators, and 31 other. If you're an other, feel free to put what your other is in the chat if you're interested in sharing. I also, someone mentioned that they can't see, oh, okay. Thanks, Haley. Awesome. So just to make sure, you guys are seeing the slide switch, right? Great. Awesome. Social work therapist. Cool. Agency supervisor, program director. Awesome. Lots of different others. Very cool. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to answer the poll.
It would be great to get over 90% response, wouldn't it?
Ooh,
there we go.
There you go. 90. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
It's the little things.
Yes. That's a good, 90 feels good. That's an A. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It's nice to know who's in the room. Obviously, Haley and Kim are both speech therapists and I'm an OT. So that's a little bit of the lens that we're coming from, but we're really hoping that this, as you'll see, AT is a team effort. So there is something for everyone here. 91%. Awesome. All right. Thank you for sharing. Oh, I can share the results. Here you go. So here are our results. So special instructor, 80 is the most. But you're all here because AT is important for all of us. So thank you. All right, Kim, I'll throw this back to you now.
All right. So let me tell you a little bit about assistive technology. First of all, I personally think it's a really, really stupid name because all technology is assistive. There is no technology that doesn't assist somewhere, somehow, by some person. So, and I have to stop and apologize. I just called the term stupid, and I'm trying really hard not to be ableist in that way. It's just misinformed. So if all technology is assistive, what is the word assistive referring to? And it's referring to technology that is used by a person with a disability or a senior to improve their function or maintain their function. The term assistive technology was coined back when they were writing the Aac Act, and the government didn't want to create a program where anybody could have technology. This was specifically a program for people with disabilities. So they all sat around a table, and I know some of the people that were sitting there at the time, and they said, well, we'll call it assistive technology. People since then have thrown out lots of different ideas about what it could be called. But the term means tools and technology and devices and services for anybody with a disability. So when we talk about devices, that's anything. It is, if an empty toilet paper roll makes something easier for somebody to do, then it's a piece of assistive technology. It's any item, any piece of equipment, any system, whether you buy it off a shelf, you modify something you already have, or you take something that was created for the masses, and we call that generic technology, and you use it in a way to help a person with a disability, then it is assistive technology. But that's not all that we mean when we say assistive technology. So that's the noun, the devices, but then we also have the verb, which are the services. And AT services are also considered assistive technology. So any service that directly assists a person with a disability or the person's family in the selection, acquisition, use, maintenance, upgrade, any of that for an assistive technology device. So you can see that it's not ever enough just to get something and hand it to a person and walk away. There's a lot of services that need to be wrapped around that for it to be successful. So just, Alana, I don't have who's assigned what slide, so I'm going to keep going until you tell me to stop.
Perfect.
So AT services often include evaluating the needs of a child with a disability, including what the child can do and what they struggle to do in a variety of environments that the child finds themselves in. It also includes purchasing, leasing, or otherwise getting AT. So I know that Haley's going to talk in a little while. SLPs often find themselves in the role of having to write pretty lengthy insurance reports. That's considered an AT service. The selecting, the designing, the fitting, the customizing, the adapting, the applying, the maintaining, the repairing, the replacing, all of that, all of those activities are AT services. And depending on how sophisticated the AT is, that can take a chunk of time, but often, and most often, AT devices can be very simple. We also coordinate and use other therapies to make the use of the device. the device should never stand alone. It's should be integrated into a person's life. It should be, and this is, we've heard this in TLC trainings for years, right? That in all situations, in all environments, for all people, the AT should be infused, not placed on top of or separate from. We also help folks learn, and the child or the child's family learn how to use this and maintain it and whatever it needs. And then a big chunk, and what I find myself doing a lot of times, is providing technical assistance for professionals such as yourself, or for statewide stakeholders, to figure out what's the best way to get these services for everybody. And so the technical assistance is about giving a framework to how to help somebody use technology in the major life functions for that child. And remember, particularly with children, technology changes, their needs change over time. Sometimes it's a matter of their bodies getting bigger. Sometimes it's a matter of them learning what they didn't know before. So it can be a lot of different things, but all of these AT services are what's defined in IDEA. I think I said something about this a second ago, but assistive technology is not just tablets, and it's not just AAC. And you know, I say this often because I've been doing this work for a very long time. And I remember carrying around, for a long time, carrying around a big bag of toys. And then we realized that that wasn't the way to do it, that we really needed to use what was in a child's environment and make it therapeutic. And I did that for a long time. And then only 11 years ago, it'll be 11 years in June, the iPad was introduced to the world. And I think it took about 4 months to completely change the way I did my job. Completely. I went from having this tool that I could use. Now, at the time, it was also very sexy. It was very, all the kids wanted to get their hands on it. It was novel, it was exciting, and moved therapy quickly. That doesn't mean that I didn't also always use what was in a child's natural environment, but it was an extra thing in my back pocket. But you build up spoons, that's assistive technology. You create a zipper pull, that's assistive technology. So assistive technology can be fidgets, it can be all sorts of different things, and not just tablets and AAC. So even though you've got 2 speech language pathologists on this seminar, I'm sure Alana would jump up and down and say, hey, what about all of the other AT that is out there? And so do I.
Yes. Yeah. And on this screen, we have utensils and a zipper and noise canceling headphones, a walker, a little robot toy, a wheelchair, and a bunch of like fidgets or balls all surrounding an iPad. And we're constantly expanding what we think of as AT. Awesome. Thanks, Kim. So I'll talk a little bit about the AT Continuum, which I find to be a little bit messy. Every AT Continuum I've ever seen is slightly different. So take it with a grain of salt, but I think the most important piece of it is just that it is a continuum. And like Kim said, that the word assistive in assistive technology is maybe not the best name. I find that technology in the word assistive technology is maybe not the right name, because so much of AT is like not what we consider technology. And I think that can be very misleading. And that's because some AT is like no tech at all. It might be simple environmental modifications. It might be completely free or inexpensive and ready to use, zero tech involved at all. It might be what some people call low tech or light tech, or some people call rapid access. So something really easy to learn, readily available, affordable, something from the dollar store. Medium tech is that like kind of in between stuff that I think commonly OTs and PTs and speech therapists are very used to. It may cost a little more and require some training. And then we have that very high tech stuff, which I would say is what most people think of when they first hear AT, which is like an eye gaze device and all that fancy stuff that needs a lot of training. It might require ongoing support. It's very electronic, digital, high tech AT. But all of this, all across the spectrum, is considered AT. So just to go through some examples from the AT continuum. So this stuff is sometimes considered no tech, sometimes considered light tech. We have pencil grips, Post-it notes, highlighters to highlight certain sections, large print, visual schedules, and there's a picture here of Post-it notes and pencil grips. And all of this stuff could be considered light tech or no tech. And even stuff like changing the lighting, changing some seating around, anything that sort of changes the environment could be considered assistive technology. So that's one end of that continuum. In the middle, we have things like switches, talking calculators, audiobooks, adapted keyboards. Here we have an ergonomic keyboard in the photo and some headphones. And this is a lot, we're going to talk a lot about switches and stuff like that today. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have our high-tech stuff. So tablets and smartphones, those environmental control devices that can control lots of different things in a home, eye gaze devices that use your eyes and your pupils to select things. A dedicated AAC speech generating device would be considered high-tech. Power wheelchairs, scanning software, like Seeing AI, which is an app from Microsoft, which you can hold up your phone and it will tell you what it's looking at, and Braille devices. In this photo, we have a Braille device and a power wheelchair. So that's some of our high-tech stuff. So when we're thinking about AT for early intervention, this is from the PACER Center. We're really thinking about things that create opportunities. Like Kim said, they need to be built into daily routines, and thinking about AT as a bridge between what a child can do independently and then what a child is expected to do or wants to do. And AT can really be that bridge. So when we're considering AT on the IEP and IFSP, this is something that like really through my years as an OT, I feel was not highlighted enough. And now looking back, I'm thinking of all those times that I had really sat down with that IEP team and thought more deeply about assistive technology. But for every child with an IFSP or IEP, AT must be considered. So during that meeting, AT has to be discussed. That doesn't mean AT has to be used, but it means that AT must be considered during that time. And you have to document what you've discussed and document what you've tried. And like everything, AT has to be related to the outcomes or goals and objectives. So AT should connect in some way to one of those goals in the IEP or IFSP. So these are really three such important pieces that I think was missing in my work as a clinical OT. And I really want to impress upon everyone that it can be such a important and also like legally required piece of that process. So I hope it like, if you're not doing it already in every IEP and IFSP, that it starts to become a part of your process. I think I was going to ask Cindy to mention something here, but I don't know. Tom, do we have Cindy?
Yes, I'll allow her to speak.
Okay.
Carmen, I think, had something to say. And
Okay, both Carmen and Cindy have the ability to speak.
Okay, are you able to hear me now?
Sure can. Hi, Cindy.
Oh, great. Hi, how are you? The only thing I think that was excellent, and everything you said was just right on the button. So the only thing I would add is I think there is a special considerations box on the IFSP that we should check off. to say that we're considering AT or we discussed AT. And if you're going to try it, discuss it, use it, it should be included, as you said, in the outcomes, but it can also be included in the strategies. So the outcome might not speak to AT, but if you're going to try a device in order to meet that outcome, then you should definitely add it into the strategies. But check it off as a special consideration. So AT should always be noted as a special consideration if you are exploring it or discussing it to meet an outcome.
Great. Yeah, I think, and that special consideration section is what for years and years, I watched IEP teams kind of breeze through. And I think now that you've heard this, it's your obligation to make sure that section is not just breeze through. So yeah, awesome. Thank you. And feel free to chime in again if you need to. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but yeah. And then Carmen, did you have something?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. No, it's just what Cindy mentioned, that is always on considerations, and sometimes there is something used and it's not included. That is a very good point to, I mentioned that need to be included on the IFP and specify.
So you're saying it should be included in a special consideration. Can you say the last part again?
Yeah, and mention it, because sometimes it's marked, but the space is blank. Then
Gotcha.
It will be important not only to mark it, but mention what it is,
Yes.
And yeah, these are little things that sometimes we forgot as a team that complete the IFSP.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Alana, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Charity Johnson. I am going to switch with Sarah at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Charity. Tom, if you don't mind doing a switcheroo. Yes, thank you, Carmen. Yeah, so not only to check it off, but actually to discuss it and put something in there. And I'll show you, I have a couple options for you about what you can put in that section. So just a reminder, assistive technology is everyone's responsibility. So of course, it might be the speech therapist who's taking the lead on AAC, but that doesn't mean that the other members of the team are not implicated in this process. This is a picture of a family in a school sitting at a table, two parents and a kid talking to a teacher. And so everyone's part of this team, the family, the special education teacher, special instructor, the speech language pathologist, OT, PT, maybe an assistive technology specialist, maybe someone from our team who can consult with you, potentially a vision or hearing specialist, and anyone else who's on the team. Everyone is part of this process. So possible outcomes for consideration of AT. So in that special considerations section, these are 4 options that you can use for that. So the first one might be AT was considered and is not needed at this time. That might be a reasonable outcome of this conversation that you have with the team. It might be that the student is already using AT and they're using it successfully. You would need to give more information there, but the outcome might be, yes, they're already using it. We're good to go. Here's the information about it. The third outcome might be that the team has determined that the child who is not currently using AT does need AT, and they already have enough information to make a decision about the specific AT. So that would be, yes, actually, we need to get AT in here. We know everything we need to know. We're just going to put it in place. And that last section, which might come up often, is that the child does need AT, but we need more information to determine what kind of AT would meet the needs of the child. And that would require some further decision-making. It might require further evaluation or training. And so that is a good time to get our team involved. So these are sort of the 4 kind of outcomes that you might encounter. I'm going to put, once I unshare my slides at the end, I'll put a link in the chat that is a flow chart to help you sort of figure out where you're at with this. That might be helpful for you. So these are those outcomes. And just a reminder, we're going to do questions at the end. If you have something like absolutely pressing, please feel free to put it in the chat, but we will do lots of questions at the end. All right, and now I'm going to pass it over to Haley to talk about AAC.
Okay, so on the next few slides, we're going to talk about AAC, or augmentative and alternative communication. And so we're going to define what AAC is, and then we're also going to look at some different examples of systems and devices. So if we can go to the next slide. So what is AAC? Well, AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And here on the slide, we do have a definition of AAC that's from ASHA, which is the governing body for speech language pathologists and also audiologists. So ASHA stands for the American Speech Language and Hearing Association. So their big fancy definition of AAC is that it includes all forms of communication other than oral speech, and that these are used to express thoughts, needs, wants, and ideas, and that we all use AAC when we make facial expressions or gestures, use symbols or pictures, or write. And one thing to note is that every single one of us does use some form of AAC at some point throughout the day. A lot of us have probably answered an email, we've sent a text or a bunch, we've sent a Snapchat, we wrote a note to somebody, maybe scribbled down a note for ourselves or left one for a loved one. And these are all forms of communication, and they're also forms of AAC because they're not mouth words or oral speech. So basically, to kind of summarize, any type of communication that is different from oral speech or that's other from oral speech will be a form of AAC. And then there's also two sides of AAC. So there's the augmentative side and there's the alternative side. So when we say that AAC is augmentative, we mean that it's going to be used to supplement or in addition to existing speech. And then when AAC is alternative, it is used in place of oral speech, or speech that is absent or it's not functional. So here on the slide, we have an image of 3 young men who actually attended our ACEs Summer Institute in 2018. And all 3 of these gentlemen are using a AAC device. In their particular cases, they are all using what we call high-tech devices. The man in the foreground, he is a power chair user, and he's using or trialing out a iPad-based system with an app. And in his particular case, he navigates his device using a switch, so a button that's placed by his head that's connected to the iPad to help him navigate through the device and be able to select his words or his phrases to communicate about lunch with his friends here in the picture. We can go on. So a little bit further breaking down our definition of AAC. We don't just have the augmentative and the alternative side, but we also have aided and unaided forms. So here on the chart, I'm going to start with our unaided forms. So these are forms of AAC that don't use tech, so no tech solutions. And these are really going to include gestures, manual signs, any types of facial expressions, vocalizations, verbalizations, body language, and behavior. Some of the researchers and some folks do consider sign language to be a part of AAC. That is its own bona fide language with its own complex grammatical structure, syntax, and culture as well. So we're not going to focus on that part so much today, but please note that it can be considered a form of no-tech AAC. However, we often do see more gestures that might be unique to a person rather than formal ASL as well. So keep in mind that those two do exist in the AAC world. Next on our chart, we have our aided solutions. And so these are tools that are going to include something external from the body. So that's something to keep in mind. So whether it's light, mid, or high tech, these are all going to include something extra, not just what the person's able to do themselves with their body. So you will see that it is based on a hierarchy, but I do want to stress that one is not better than the other. So just because something is considered high tech doesn't mean it's the best solution for a person. In fact, light tech might be the right tech for somebody. This is also synonymous with low tech devices. However, we tend to not use low tech as often just because that kind of goes along with low functioning, and we don't want to use that label to represent people. So a lot of folks that we've worked with prefer the term light tech, and so I like to use that to respect them. So here under light tech, that can include things like pictures, objects, photographs, your writing, any type of communication book, maybe a printable or picture cards. Sometimes folks might use actual mini objects or real objects. Maybe a blanket might represent their mom or sleeping because it's soft, it's something they use at night, it comforts them. So we can use any type of tool to represent something or to symbolize something, and that can be a light text solution. Mid-tech devices are going to be those that typically use a battery and that they also tend to only record 1 or 2 messages depending on the system. These are going to be devices that actually record our voice just kind of like an old tape recorder would. And so that's kind of digitized onto the device itself. And then the high-tech devices are the fancy speech generating devices. So computerized programs that use specialized language software, things like iPads or dedicated devices. So I believe the next slide, we can see some pictures. Yep, here we go. So again, we're not looking at the hierarchy. Just because the high-tech ones are on the top doesn't mean that they're better than the guys on the bottom. But the high-tech devices are the most expensive typically. So the ones we're looking at here, the first one on the upper left corner is a bundled iPad. So when an iPad is like this, it comes in a heavy duty case. It has the specialized communication app on it. And this particular app is Touch Chat. So this is a core vocabulary based system. So that means it uses high frequency words like go, once, stop, me, you, up, down. Those make up about 80% of what we say on a daily basis. So that's core vocabulary, but it also has access to different folders for categories. So things like animals, toys, foods, body parts, clothing, you name it, there's probably a category built in to the app for that. One thing I want to mention, when an iPad with a communication app is purchased using insurance funding, it's going to be considered a piece of durable medical equipment or DME. And so that means it's a dedicated communication device. So that means it's going to have certain features that are locked down. This is usually related to internet access and other apps. So usually you can't get on the YouTube, you can't get games, things like that. And it's supposed to be for communication only. So dedicated for communication. I want to also mention too that the same iPad app situation, if we purchase it using a consumer electronics model from say Best Buy or Amazon, Target, wherever you want to get it from, it's going to cost maybe around $1,000-ish. But if we go through a specialized vendor for insurance purposes to meet DME standards, that price is going to skyrocket. So we're looking then at the same piece of equipment for maybe around $3,000 to $4,000. So that's just something I do want to mention. Keep that in mind. And we'll talk more about insurance funding a little bit later. The next 2 examples are other high-tech devices. The one in the middle is just another tablet using a core vocabulary-based system. And then on the far right is a Tobii Dynavox device. So these devices do come available with eye gaze, meaning a person can navigate and use their device using only movement of their eyes. Some devices are now available with head tracking. So that means that they can have a little bit of residual head movement or facial movement to be able to navigate their device. And the particular app on this eye gaze system is called Snap Core First. It's available on these high-tech dedicated devices, but you can also get a copy on the iPad as well. Bottom row, the first 2 on the left are examples of light tech systems. So we have a communication book featuring some Velcro picture cards. And then the next is a core communication board that has high contrast colors for somebody that has a visual impairment. Keep in mind that any of these systems can be completely customized to meet the needs of a person, whether we need to switch up the symbols, the size of things, the number of pictures available, or even the color contrast or text size to best fit that person and their needs. There's lots of options, and it's often a trial and error type of situation. So a guess and check type of thing. Next, we have the big red button device. Is called a Big Mac. So what happens is I record my voice on that, and when I press that button, it's going to activate and it's going to say that voice. So with something like this, we might record a message like tickle me or turn the page, so that then a child can participate in different activities and kind of get that cause and effect idea from communication, like, oh, when I hit this, mom will come running and give me tickles. And so that really helps that kiddo participate in that engagement and that interaction. And that's also super fun, because who doesn't want tickles from mom when they're playing and they're 3 years old? And so next on the bottom right is a Go Talk device. So this one here specifically has the options for up to 4 messages. But there are different field sizes available. So there's one that has 9 pictures, there's one that has more pictures. And so with a Go Talk, it uses what we call a page overlay. So that means I take a piece of paper that has my 4 images on it and I slide it in under the plastic grid. And then I can program a message for each. So in this specific example, it might say happy, cat, ball, and maybe stop. And so when I hit that particular button, it's going to activate whatever is recorded underneath of that. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that when we record a voice on one of these devices, we want to pick a voice that represents the person the best we can. So in the case of like a teenager, I don't think a male teenager is going to want my voice per se on their device. With the little ones, they tend to be a little more flexible with that, but that's something to keep in mind as children age too, that we want to give them a device that also has a voice that reflects them and is authentic to them. All right, so we can go on a little bit more about the light tech systems. Again, light tech is going to be the right tech solution for some people, and that is totally okay. And we also want to make sure that someone who uses a high tech system as their main form of AAC also has a light tech alternative as a backup, especially for kiddos. Sometimes we might not want to take that $10,000 fancy high tech device to the pool, the beach. Maybe we don't want it floating in the bathtub during bath time, but the child still needs to be able to communicate then as well. So in these cases, we might have that light tech, maybe a core board, maybe it's even screenshots of their high-tech device printed and laminated. Maybe we've attached it to a boogie board or some sort of floaty toy for the pool. Or maybe we got it printed on one of those like waterproof yard signs. I've seen a lot of folks do that, and that's a great alternative. So then it's durable and the child can bring it with them. We can also print out pages of communication apps and then introduce them to children to see if the symbols or maybe the layout of the system might be a good fit. And we can do this maybe before we do a formal trial of a device, or maybe that in between kind of limbo phase where a kiddo's completed the trial, had to return that trial device, but then they're still waiting for their permanent device to arrive. So we can use a light tech system to keep them familiar with the device, give them access to that communication and their voice, and then now we have a backup that we can use in the case of a device isn't charged or it needs to be repaired. Here on the slide, you can see there's a couple examples of some core boards. One's just a printed laminated piece of paper. The other one is a flip book. So there's lots of variations out there. And you can also get access to a lot of core boards for free at aaccommunity.net. If you go to that website and then type in core boards on the search bar, you're going to be able to find lots of different links and resources for core boards. Some of them are more unique, and then some of them are also versions of high-tech apps or devices as well. So feel free to access those. It's a great place to start. Okay. And so when we're considering AAC for some children, there's a few things that teams and families can really be keeping in mind. So first off, the team is really going to want to identify if the child is having a difficult time communicating, or is it hard for the family and others to really be understanding what the child is trying to convey in their message, or maybe through their gestures or behaviors. We can also look at some of these other questions that are listed here on the slide. So is the child speaking as well as their typical same age peers? If formal speech language assessments were given, how did that kiddo, how did their score compare to that of other students or other children their age? Are we seeing a significant receptive expressive language gap? So for example, often a lot of our children are going to demonstrate a higher receptive language skill. That's pretty typical. We see that quite often, but then when they're really then also having a hard time expressing themselves, it's leading to maybe some quote negative behaviors. Maybe they're crying a lot, they're frustrated a lot. We want to see what's going on and how we can jump in and help them improve that communication. Also, sometimes kiddos, they are able to use their oral speech, but it's just not clear, it's not intelligible, and maybe it's not improving with different therapy or different supports. And so then we might want to start introducing that AAC device and consider that for this child so they're not left being misunderstood. And of course, I mentioned behaviors and frustration. Nobody wants to be frustrated, and we don't want children to associate communicating with frustration. I mean, it's okay to be upset every now and then. You're not always going to get what you want just because you asked mom for it. That's okay. But we also want to make sure that children are being able to express themselves and represent themselves effectively too. And then also some children do have disabilities that we might anticipate there might be a communication difficulty. And so that might kind of be that red flag, like, hey, this might be on the radar. We want to keep an eye out for this, make sure communication's developing, or if it's not going the speed we think it should, then maybe we want to start looking at some AAC strategies to help support that child. All right. So prerequisites for AAC, there are no prerequisites, just like the slide says. So if a child or any individual is really alive and breathing, then they are going to be eligible for AAC. So there's really no skills that need to be mastered before AAC is introduced. Often we hear things like, oh, well, they can't do X, Y, and Z skill. They can't do that. They don't have cause and effect yet. And that's not a reason to say no to AAC. In fact, we can work on things like reciprocal communication, we can work on turn taking, we can work on that cause and effect while we're also introducing and using AAC. So just because a kiddo doesn't have those things yet, or those skills are an area that they're emerging for them, we can work on those along with their AAC. And often we'll see a lot of improvements in those skills too, that now the child has a way to effectively communicate that works for them. So of course here too, we see that even again, those emergent communicators can be introduced to AAC. Language and access to communication is really going to impact cognition as well. There's going to be a positive impact there. And then most importantly, communication is a human right at the end of the day. Even for our children, they have that right to be able to express themselves. And we want to make sure that we're giving the little ones access to communication in a way that's going to work for them. So for an AAC evaluation, we do have different objectives, and I do want to mention that families and teams do not necessarily need a speech therapist to initiate this AAC process. Sometimes it is the speech therapist that does initiate it or make that recommendation, and that's fantastic, but it's okay too for families and other team members to see if there's a need for communication to bring it up for the team to further explore. There are things like those free apps available. There are those free core boards that can be introduced at any time. SLPs themselves can pull those as resources to introduce to kiddos without a big formal AAC evaluation. And even families can maybe try out some of those systems too. But of course, if at any time a family member or additional team has specific questions involving language or speech development, things like that, it is good to maybe run those things by the SLP, make sure everyone on the team is on board and collaborating, of course. So another thing too, though, that if a family does decide that they want to pursue a speech generating device, so a communication device through their insurance, they are going to need that SLP, and they need to be licensed and certified so that then they can submit to insurance. So that in that case, that SLP is the only person who's going to be legally allowed to submit that written report for that device for evaluation. So that's when 100% teams need that SLP on board. And a couple of things too with the evaluation. So if we're looking at a more formal evaluation process, The purpose is really going to be to review the communication overall. So what are the children's strengths in communicating and what are their needs in communicating? And then typically you're going to also go over and explore different devices and systems that are going to match those needs. And the evaluation is typically going to include system trials as well. And usually this information is needed to be able to move forward with that funding piece. So device trials are needed to be able to fund insurance. Insurance companies like to see what worked, what didn't work, and why. You need a rationale for everything, basically. But overall here, the big goal is that we want to make sure that this child has the opportunity to explore the different systems and make sure that whatever we're picking out is the right recommendation that's going to work best for this child. Okay, and just some other important information on this slide here. This is some of the information that's going to be obtained during that formal AAC evaluation. So some of this information is really going to come from the family and the team, such as the case history and ecological inventory, different support systems that are available, medical information, things like that. So it's really good for the team and the family to come ready to a formal AAC assessment with this information and provide that, because all of this information is going to be needed in this big, fancy, long report for insurance. I'd also, if say I was the evaluating therapist, I want to hear from the OT, a vision specialist, a hearing specialist, the PT, anyone involved on that kiddo's team, I want to hear from, because that information is really going to help narrow down which devices or specifications of a device and features of a device that are going to be appropriate for that kiddo. Other components are going to be a more in-depth look at the child's communication, so different speech and language assessments, their social communication, but then we'll look further into like, does a child need certain symbols? Do they need pictures? Maybe they do need those tactile objects. And so that further helps us feature match or narrow down the devices by the specific features or factors that make them up. And so again, all of this information, it seems like a lot, but it's going to be useful down the road when we have to write a big fancy report.
Thanks, Haley. Before we get to talking a little bit about the lending library, a couple of questions that might be good to just answer now before we go on. Is there a wait time right now for requesting an AAC eval through Tekl?
There's, depending on the ages, so for the children here, and Kim, you can jump in if you have more specifications or details about this. Typically, if we're looking at a formal AAC evaluation for someone where you would like the Tekl SLP to submit to insurance, that's going to be a fee for service evaluation. We do have a slide later in the presentation about AT consults, so that's a little different. But that type of, the AT consult is free for children in Philadelphia registered with IDS, but that's not going to result in an insurance request. Myself and my colleague, Catherine Helland, we are more than happy to help support an SLP with writing that report, as well as other members of the team who might need some support with the AAC device. But unfortunately, through that specific service alone, we are not able to write and submit that insurance request. But we do offer those fee for service assessments. And I think that answered a little bit of the follow-up question. The AAC evaluations are an AT consult, so an assistive technology consultation. So it's more of a brainstorming session and device demonstration for the child. And that is free to families and children in Philadelphia County. And then a Monco or other types of counties in the area would need to go through a fee for service, or we can do a device demonstration or just a meeting for like information and assistance through the Tekl programs.
So let me jump in here again. You're right, Haley. I mean, it's kind of stepped because we have so many different funding sources. Anybody can have a demonstration in the state of Pennsylvania where we talk to them and we show folks a couple of different things and we brainstorm with them. We do have a contract with the city of Philadelphia to do AT consults with teams, with early intervention teams, where if you're in the city of Philadelphia and you have somebody that you're questioning ideas around, then we could do a consult where that would be an extended period of time where we would go through things. And frankly, you know, we are very generous with our time and always want to help folks. But if somebody needs an insurance request written, that is very time intensive. And so we really, and it's better if the SLP that's working with a child write that, and we will give them support in doing that. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and then the last question before we move on, who pays that fee for service when the SLP at Tekl writes the report? Someone wants to help a family access that.
It's a variety of things. We do not bill insurance, but so often families pay, often school districts will decide that it's necessary and pay. So it's a variety of funding sources.
And Tom, just so you know, I can't see the Q&A for some reason when I'm screen sharing, which I think that happened to Haley on another presentation. So that might not just be me. So I can't personally see the Q&A. If someone else can see it, they can.
I can see it.
Okay.
Michelle asks if there is a deaf child who's not learning ASL, but instead learning spoken language and who is unintelligible, would an AAC evaluation be warranted? You want to take that one, Haley?
Yeah, I would say yes. If any child is having any difficulty communicating and expressing themselves, I think any type of AAC evaluation is fair to at least explore the options and open that discussion for the child. Maybe the child chooses that they don't like one of those systems. That's okay. There's always other options as well for them, but it's going to kind of open that gate for communication. So I would say yes, get the kiddo an AAC evaluations, or at least start exploring things like core boards, maybe some of the free apps available on iPads as well, just to give that kiddo some access to expressive language.
And I'm going to jump in here and say, you know, things have really changed in the world of AAC. And again, before the iPad 11 years ago, you couldn't get access to speech generating AAC without an assessment. And now, frankly, you can. There are some free apps, some low cost apps that you don't need to wait for this big, expensive process to incorporate AAC in your intervention with the child to see what happens.
Great. And if you guys see anything else in the Q&A, feel free to chime in. And then Kim, I'm going to let you talk about the beginning of the lending library, and then I'll chime in.
Okay. So we have a very robust lending library. I couldn't have said that 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we had a very outdated lending library, and most of the stuff that we had to lend was almost obsolete. We're fortunate that through a lot of different partnerships, we've been able to rapidly upgrade and extend our lending library. We now have hundreds of iPads to lend, and we can put any app that anybody requests on that iPad. And iPads are just one of the things we have to lend. We did get rid of all of our switch activated toys that were plush when COVID hit, and are trying hard to replace those plush switch activated toys with switch activated toys that can't hold germs as easily and can be easily sanitized. But we have lots of different switches you can try. We have a lot of different interesting things for little children. And we now are using our lending library. We're hooked in with our national program database. And so you can actually go in, and this just started in October, you can go in and create an account And then you can see your loan history. You can see what you've loaned. You can see what you have out on loan. People can borrow up to 5 devices. If you are borrowing as a professional supporting a person with a disability, that's fine. You can borrow that. Now, sometimes it makes sense to have the family borrow something. But that's a personal, it depends on what the situation is. Like I said, we went from a loan period of 3 weeks to a year ago, increasing it to 4 weeks. And now we're pleased to be able to increase a loan period to 9 weeks. If somebody wants to keep something for more than 9 weeks, and nobody else has requested it, we can extend that. But really, we would start saying to you at that point, if this is something that you want to keep for more than 9 weeks, and if it's something that you think is useful for this person, let's talk about how we can help you figure out how that person can get it for good. Our iPads are managed by us, which means that we can push and pull apps at will. So if you ask for an iPad and you want a couple of very expensive apps on it, we will try our darndest to put them on it and send it to you. But sometimes we might have to then call you and say, are you using both of those? Because we need somebody else. We only have 15 instances of Touch Chat HD. Actually, we have 25, but 20 person number 26 wants to borrow it. And if you're not using it, then we'd like to put it on their iPad. We can pull it from your iPad, even if you're in Montgomery County, and put it on somebody else's iPad in Lancaster County. We can do that. So we also have a lot of Chromebooks that we can lend, and a lot of other things. We're replenishing all of the time. So this is how you borrow. You just go to the Borrow tab and click on Go to Library. And then you can browse the inventory all you want, but if you want to borrow, you have to create an account and then add your items to the cart and check them out online. And we do what we call drop shipping. We ship them directly to you. Now, we also have some on-site inventory that is at Temple University that you can come and pick up. Like I said before, that's the way I accessed it. But we're not allowed on campus yet. So right now, everything is coming through our centralized inventory in the middle of the state, and we ship it back and forth, and you don't have to pay for any shipping. And frankly, if I had known about that option when I was doing your work, I would have probably wanted it to come from centralized inventory, so I didn't have to figure out the maze that is Temple.
Kim, who is responsible if a device is lost or damaged?
You do sign a waiver saying that you're responsible if a device is lost or damaged. And I will say that we understand that things happen. And it's really more about you communicating openly and honestly with us about what's going on. I'm the one that sends out the nasty letters that says you've dropped off the face of the earth with our stuff and we want it back. And you know, if people reach out and we have a conversation, those issues can usually be resolved. And frankly, it doesn't happen very often. Does that help?
Yes, I'm sure it does, hopefully. And then I'll let Haley and Kim, you guys talk about apps because this is your area. But meanwhile, we have a little interactive piece. So type in the chat, what is your favorite app for early intervention? So while Kim and Haley talk a little bit about some play-based apps, just put in the chat your favorite early intervention app that you use if you do use a tablet and apps.
So I can start. Oh, somebody said my Playhome right away. Love it, love it. I can start and say that I started out with a lot of specialized apps on my iPad that I used with little kids, and quickly found that it's important to keep, we all know that we need to keep children engaged, and it doesn't really matter how we keep them engaged, but in the area of speech therapy, I want them engaged, and then I overlay on top of that my goals and objectives and my interventions around speech and language. So I like to use generic apps that are not necessarily made for, quote, speech therapy, end quote, but are general play apps that I can use as a carrier activity for the real important work of therapy.
Awesome. And Haley, if you have any that you want to chime in with, we may have time at the end to share some apps, though I don't predict that we will, but we can always talk more about apps.
I'm loving all these apps that I'm seeing. Can I just say?
And some people don't use apps at all, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
I don't know Art of Glow. I'm gonna have to check that one out. We'll give you a couple more seconds to type your favorite apps in the chat. Yeah, and for some people,
Boca apps are great. Yeah. Haley, what do you think?
oh, you're muted, Haley. Yep.
My favorite is Peekaboo Bar. Everyone gets Peekaboo Bar.
Yeah, some people don't like using screens, and that's fine.
I have to say that my thought about using screens with little kids has changed over time. If I'm working with a child that has a complicated body, I find that screens is not a screen. It is a window into being able to do and immerse yourself in activities that you might not be able to do without a screen. So in my head, screens, yes, kids, we need to be very careful about how much screen time a typically developing child has access to. But when we are talking about folks that don't have access to typical play and movement, then I think that this is an alternative.
I think another fun thing is to find like those like live videos of different things. Like there's like the eagle cam with the nest of eagles, or the video at the aquarium or something like that. And it might not be as interactive, but we can use that instead of just turning on YouTube, and have them be able to talk about things or explore or point out, kind of play hide and seek or like I Spy on those different videos. And of course, you can always create the link and make that its own little app to open it up to that specific web page as well.
That's great. Yeah, and someone said they only use it for 2 to 5 minutes. So yeah, so it might be that you use a tablet, but just for a very brief time, and it might be really engaging for those couple minutes. So that's a great way to use it. And we have tablets in our lending library that are available to borrow. And so if you're someone who's like maybe on the edge of exploring tablet use in therapy, that's a great reason to try it. Awesome. So we're going to keep moving on with our lending library, and we'll get to some questions after. So a few other things that we have in our lending library that we wanted to highlight. So we have some things for ADLs, activities of daily living. So we have things like zipper pulls. We also make some kinds of zipper pulls in our Create program, which I will talk about. And then we have this Liftware level spoon, which I was really excited to try out. I ordered this from the lending library to try out. It's something I've been seeing online for a while. And this is, again, a great use of our lending library, things that I have heard about, have seen, but have never been able to get my hands on. I actually got to try this and see what it feels like. And so it might be that you want to try something out, and it might not work for any of your clients, but at least now you know what it's like. So that Liftware level spoon, in this picture, someone's holding it, and this spoon really bends and moves, and it's kind of, I don't know what kind of sensors it has in there, but it's really able to, no matter which direction your arm is, it can still, the spoon part of it can still go toward your mouth. So that's in our lending library. I like how people are still putting in their apps. Great. then as we mentioned before, we have a ton of switches. So these are just 3 of our many switch varieties that we have. We have Bluetooth switches. So this Bluetooth wireless iPad switch can be used wirelessly with an iPad. It doesn't actually need to be plugged in. We have wireless 2 switches, so something that can do 2 different things. It has a red piece and a yellow piece. It has 2 functionalities. And then we have some proximity switches. So this big candy corn switch doesn't actually even require you to press on it at all. You only have to wave your arm in front of it. And so we have all big switches, little switches, different shapes. If you go to the lending library and type in switch, you'll see there's like 20 different kinds in there. And that's an amazing tool that you can use. And they are, like Kim said, they tend to be expensive. And so you do want to try them out ahead of time and see what works. We also have lots of switch activated toys and activities. So we have this music box on the top left, where you can use switches to turn music on and off, a great cause and effect switch use. The Prisma light, same thing on the top right. We have a switch activated super soaker, which is a whole experience, might be fun over the summer. And then this Wiimote control car, which is a switch activated toy car. So like Kim said, we don't have any plush switch activated toys, but we have all these plastic ones that can be easily wiped down and clean. And these are kinds of toys that don't need a battery interrupter. They don't need to be modified for switch use. They already are ready to go for switch use. And that makes your life much simpler. Though, if you want to make a battery interrupter, we're going to be learning that on May 4th. If you want to join us, I'll give you the info for that. We also have this Skoog Music Box, which I've never seen yet in person. I'm hoping to get my hands on it soon, but it is an accessible tactile instrument. It responds to variation in pressure and location of touch. The sensitivity is adjustable, so if you can only lightly tap it, you can increase the sensitivity. And it connects wirelessly to an iPad or via USB to a Mac computer. So you could theoretically borrow both an iPad and the Skoog Music Box, or you could borrow an iPad and a switch, a wireless switch to use together. So you can order these things in conjunction with each other. And this is a picture, one person is sitting in a wheelchair, and then there's 3 other people all together that are playing with the Skoog Music Box. And they've really done a great job. I'll put the link in the chat after, of making this experience with this music device really inclusive. So it's something they've actually thought about. So it's a very cool device. We will soon have in our lending library, after I ship it out today, an Xbox adaptive controller set, 2 of them actually. So this photo is someone using all kinds of switches and triggers up by the head, and triggers and joysticks in his hands and all around. And on the right, we have the Logitech adaptive gaming kit. So when you order this Xbox kit, it'll come with a console, it'll come with the adaptive controller, which is the 2 big black buttons on the top of this image on the right. It'll come with the Logitech adaptive gaming kit, which has 12 switches, triggers, buttons, and then 2 games. And so this is an amazing way, if someone's ready, maybe not the birth to 3 kids, but to start playing video games, that they can use all these different kinds of switches and devices, and you can really simplify it and use 1 switch, or you could be using all 12. So this will be a really fun way to get people involved in switch use. And then we have those really high-tech fancy eye gaze devices. So things like the Tobii Dynavox and PRC Accents. And these are a little more complicated. I'm not going to show the video now because I don't want us to run out of time for questions, but hopefully I should be able to share these slides. And so you can all watch this video or you can check it out. But these high-tech devices do, of course, require much more training, much more thought, but we have them available and they are incredibly expensive. And so they're a great way to try that out. And they're in our lending library, so they're ready to go. I'll play this video. Okay. And as Kim mentioned, we do have sensory kits at vaccine sites. We wanted to mention that. This picture is our sensory kit. So it has noise canceling headphones. It has that dynamic seat cushion. We have 3 sand timers. We have a ton of fidgets all laying out, a squishy ball, squishy monkey, little clicky things, and a weighted lap pad. And these, I believe, there's definitely one at each center in Philadelphia. And I think there's like 8 of them total. And along with all those other accommodations that you can get at a vaccine site, like you can sit down if you need to, you can use a wheelchair if you need to, there are ASL interpreters. This is another accommodation that can be used at vaccine sites. And I wanted everyone to know about that. All right, so we're going to talk about funding now. I'm going to pause for a second because I feel like this is a big topic. Take a deep breath before we move on. Okay. if you have any questions about what we said previously, feel free to put it in the chat. And we're happy to answer them. But we're going to talk a little bit about funding because it is important. So Kim, I'm going to pass this over to you.
Sure. So why should you care about funding?
We're going to switch.
There's a couple of reasons. You need to advocate for your clients. You need to understand the kind of financial challenges that people face, and help your clients make informed decision. And it may be part of your job. Like, I don't know whether in your case, you have to help somebody figure out how to pay for something, but it's important to know what's available and what's out there. And you may need it in the future. So as you're working, you may come upon a situation where somebody needs your help figuring out how to get something paid for. So we think about funding as public and private. Public funding sources are early intervention is required to provide AT if it's written into the IFSP, but only for education. So it's a little bit tricky. Public education also, again, will fund AT if it's written into the IEP, but only for education, which means in the case of a lot of the assistive technology we talk about, it stays at school. And so for the 7 hours that a child is at school, they have access to the assistive technology, but it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the school. It's tricky when somebody goes from early intervention into kindergarten. If they have AT that's been provided for them through early intervention, that AT does not follow them unless there are special transition plans made for it. You can also get AT through Medicaid and CHIP. And it takes a long time. And the thing that I always felt with little kids is they change so rapidly that if a process to get somebody something takes a long time, then we might miss our window of opportunity. Those are the most common public ones. You do have a legal requirement to consider AT for every child with an IFSP. And it must be provided at no cost in most cases. Again, if you think though about the child and you think it's something that the child is going to need for more, they're going to age out and they're still going to need it, then that's a consideration. Medicaid and CHIP is available for children, you probably know this already, for children with limited income. AT is considered durable medical equipment under the Medicaid and CHIP programs, which means it has to be medically necessary for it to be covered under the federal Medicaid law. If there's something that can withstand repeated use, that is typically used for a medical purpose, is generally not useful to the person if they didn't have an illness or injury, then it can be considered durable medical equipment and it can be paid for through Medicaid and CHIP. Private funding sources, particularly one of the things that we're really seeing is most AT is dropping in price because what's happening is a lot of generic technology is becoming more accessible and adding more accessibility features. And sometimes it's easier to just buy it if you can. It's especially if you think that the child is going to need it within the next 6 months. I know that that's not the case, that people can buy things outright. I think sometimes though that people think that they can buy their teenager a gaming console, and they think that they shouldn't spend their own money on AT. And I would like to challenge that a little bit. If a little kid needs AT, that's just important as a bigger kid needing a gaming console, in my humble opinion. But I have had a lot of success getting things funded through crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, where, you know, you say to somebody's family, they've got a kiddo with a very complicated body and none of the relatives know what to get them for their birthday. And you say, look, if everybody pools their money, we can get this for them that will really have a lasting impact. You can use private insurance. Again, same with public programs, they make it very hard. And typically things are denied the first time and you have to go back a second time. It is possible and people should do it if something is very expensive. There are private foundations and charities. We have a little granting program at Tekl where we can help out a little bit as a last resort, and that's the Virginia del Sorto Fund. This Jenny was a woman that worked with us. When she passed away, she left a little bit of money for us to give out by grants, and it's only $200, but $200 sometimes really makes the difference. And it doesn't need to completely fund something, it can go toward funding something. We also have the AT reuse program, where we can often find previously owned AT and get it into the hands of people who need it. You can also get a loan. There is an organization in Pennsylvania called PATF, or Pennsylvania's Assistive Technology Foundation, and they are able to give low interest or no interest cash loans. So if you need, and now their no interest goes up to $7,000. So if you know you need something and you can't afford it, they can help by giving you a cash loan with very, very reasonable repayment terms. And they do a nice job over at PATF. And I think, the only other thing I missed was the CREATE program that I think Alana is going to talk about in a few minutes.
Yeah, I will. And before we let Haley talk about funding for AAC, I just wanted to mention that I know this may sound a little AAC heavy, and that is for a reason. It's because this, as you may realize, AAC is so often what we see as AT in early intervention, especially, I'd say, I mean, really all the time, but I think it's just so critical to understand this piece, and that as OTs, as PTs, as all the other team, that this AAC process can be ours too, that we should also be empowered to be a part of this process. That SLPs may not have the experience to know the best way a child can access their device. They know a ton about it and they probably have a lot of experience, but they may need support from the OT and the PT to figure out the best way to access their device and the best way to incorporate it into their day, and from the OT, and maybe talk to the special instructor about the best way to use where they are developmentally and how they're learning to incorporate AAC. So yes, we are talking a lot about AAC, and that has been, I think, historically such a big part of AT, especially in the pediatric world. But I hope that you all feel empowered, no matter what background or lens you're coming from, to be a part of that process. That's our hope. But yeah, it does come up a lot and it's so complicated. So I'm going to let Haley talk about funding. And then someone asked about stair glides for inside steps. I think stair glides for steps could be considered AT. I don't know if it's considered DME. That's a question. Kim, you may know that.
It has to come down to what the need is for. And yes, it is AT. And sometimes it's DME. AT, think about it as AT is the big umbrella and DME is a smaller umbrella underneath the big umbrella.
Yeah, and Aviva, I I would say AT is like not always going to be the word that gets funding. Like AT is a little too broad to often get funding. DME is a better word for insurance funding, unfortunately, for better or for worse. So DME.
And the big thing is, why is it medically necessary? That's what you have to prove.
Right. So yeah, good questions, everyone. It's complicated, and I think it's sort of like ever changing, which is why it makes it extra complicated. But thanks for those questions. All right, Haley.
Yes, so going into insurance funding for AAC, and to kind of piggyback off of what Alana said, even though a lot of the components on this specific piece can really only be completed legally by the SLP, like for example, the report writing and submission itself, but a lot of that information that's going to be written into the report is going to come from those other team members. So those areas of expertise are going to be very valuable, especially if, for example, a kiddo with a complex body, if I need to write in the reports something about their switches or their access or a mounting system, maybe to attach to their power chair, I'm not an expert on positioning. I don't know that information that well. So I'm going to need to hear from the PT and the OT so I can be able to know what to write, what specific mount we might need, where that mount needs to go into the device, and where to put that information. So I'm going to need to hear from those other team members to help me write that section of the report, if that makes sense. And before I jump into some of this more stuff, a quick question, because this is very relevant, is how do you differentiate between medical necessity and educational necessity, and how does insurance view it? And to be kind of a little transparent, insurance really doesn't care about the school that much. They don't care about the educational part. Of course, I always include a section about the child needs to be able to communicate at school, but my focus isn't going to be the child needs to be able to communicate at school to access their curriculum. It's they need to be able to communicate at school to be able to express their needs, their wants, to be able to alert the teacher or the staff about their medical status, to share their feelings, to share if they're hungry or if they're unwell. The bigger piece with the insurance process is you really want to focus more on those key words related to healthcare and that health status. That's going to be the big part. Now, if we're trying to get a school district to pay for a device, usually then in the IEP or the IFSP, then we're going to focus on that educational piece. So it kind of depends on who's funding the device, what lens we're going to look for. As practitioners and professionals in this field, we do know, of course, both of those are going to be super important for that child. And with communication, I like to think not being able to communicate effectively is enough for your education and your medical needs. But when it comes down to the funding source, that's not the case. We kind of have to pick one and focus on that, unfortunately, how things are right now. So just to kind of skim over this, we've already kind of talked about that AAC, when it's funded through insurance, is going to be considered durable medical equipment because it's going to meet those specific standards. So we're kind of looking at two different things. We're looking at dedicated devices. So those are going to be things like those eye gaze devices, maybe a Nova Chat from Saltillo, an accent device from Pranky Romich Company or PRC. So those are more like specific dedicated communication devices. Then we also have bundled iPads or tablets. So they're going to be technically, these bundled iPads are then considered a dedicated device, but essentially they're just an iPad that got packaged by a vendor that went through certain standards to get that stamp of dedicated device. So it's really going to be based down on those reduced app and internet capacities. Same thing too, though, a lot of these higher tech dedicated devices also have access to internet and apps and different games and stuff too, but still insurance tends to kind of lock those guys down as well. So with insurance companies, just like with any other medical procedure or product, there's going to be those in-network and out-of-network providers and vendors for the AAC devices. And so that being said, a big takeaway point here is really insurance companies do not get to dictate which device is being recommended for that child. So there are often going to be cases where an in-network device vendor is not the right option for that child, and that then they don't offer a device through that vendor that's going to meet those specific needs that that child has to have for their device. And so usually when this happens, the SLP is then going to need to provide additional paperwork and justification for the insurance company to then approve an out-of-network device. Recently, it seems like I've had a lot of families and teams kind of going backwards through the process, that insurance is saying like what device that the child needs to get and kind of dictating the process. And that's usually not how we want things to go. One of those things too is that we might want to start with that evaluation and that device trial and then move through the insurance process rather than necessarily calling insurance and saying, what device do you cover? Because then they're just going to flat out tell you, kiddo's going to get this X, Y, and Z device. And that might really be inappropriate for that kiddo. So there's a kind of a certain way we usually want to move through this process. Of course, sometimes there's always exceptions to certain cases and to certain processes, but that's generally how we want to go to avoid them telling the child what they need rather than the child telling us, and then therefore the insurance company what works for them. Okay. So the funding process, so the way that we typically want this to go, and of course there's always those variations, but the typical process and the basic steps, regardless of the insurance company, whether it's a private company or Medicaid, Medicare, we're usually going to have that evaluation that's completed by that licensed and certified SLP. Typically there's going to be device trials. Kiddos in Pennsylvania, there isn't really, for most insurances, an X number of weeks or days that you have to trial a device. Some states and insurance companies there are, but as of now, there is not here in PA that at least I've run into. And so if a kiddo we're trying out app A and kiddo's not liking it, there's no reason to keep working on that. If it's not working, let's move on to the next one so we can give that child the most practice and the most exposure to the app that's going or device that's going to work for them. So then once the child and the family and the team all kind of decide on what that final recommendation is going to be, let the SLP know, and the SLP is going to write that report and submit that paperwork and report to the device vendor specifically. The family and team might have to sign off on some things. Usually they're going to need copies of the insurance cards. There's going to need to be some signatures. And then the doctor is going to need to write a prescription for the medical necessity of the recommended device. So what the doctor writes on the prescription needs to match what was recommended in the SLP's report. And sometimes the kiddo might need to go have an appointment with the doctor, so it's more recent. So just that's kind of something to keep in mind. But then the device vendor is usually going to deal with all of the insurance behind the scenes stuff. Families and teams very rarely have to, as long as the process goes smooth, very rarely have to pick up the phone and deal with insurance unless there's a huge problem or insurance decides to give people a runaround. The device vendors usually will let you know up front if the device is going to be approved, if there's going to be additional paperwork that's needed, or if there's any copays that might be needed for the device. Sometimes though, insurance might deny or they might reject the first round of the submission. And then in that case, we can just submit another appeal. So one thing to mention though is I like to say that usually you're going to get rejected that first round. And if you don't, then that's great. That's so exciting, time to celebrate. But typically insurance, we all know insurance doesn't want to pay for anything usually, and they're going to give us a hard time. So we should go into getting a device just like that we're probably going to get a rejection first. So then what we want to do is we might need additional documentation. We might need to strengthen that argument for the medical necessity. And often in a lot of these cases, the device vendors, they have a funding department that's going to tell you what you might need to change in that report or the documentation. They might tell you need to write a letter saying X, Y, and Z, and they'll give you that information to help you get the best chance of getting this device funded. For example, a recent case of mine, I chose an out-of-network provider. The fun part was the device that I had recommended for kiddo was about $5,000 cheaper than the device from the vendor that they were trying to say was in-network. And I just had to write a letter saying that all of their in-network providers, and I had to list them by name, did not provide the specific device I was recommending. And then once they received that, it was approved the next day. So sometimes it's that easy. Sometimes they're going to give you a little bit of a hard time. Worst case scenario is that it's taken too long, or you eventually get a flat out rejection or denial from insurance. It doesn't mean it's over, that we can always look at other types of funding sources. Then maybe we take the device and the request for communication to the school district and look at getting that AAC funded through the school. Or maybe we want to look at other types of grant programs like Kim had mentioned. Another option might be something like Achieve a Family Trust. That's a quarterly based program that families and children can apply for assistive technology. So that's also an option. But if insurance is going to pay for it and they're going to pay for it in full, I like to say, let's go for it. In a lot of cases, one thing though to mention with schools though is sometimes we do hear that when kiddos might leave the school district or they might move, if the district purchased the device with district funds, that device then might stay at the school district. And if the child moves out of the district, then they no longer have their device. So that's just something to consider and keep in mind though. But if a child needs it for communication is part of the curriculum, they should provide that. So you kind of have to look at what's going to work best for the kid and their specific situation. So some do's and don'ts. We don't want to call it an iPad, even though we know it's an iPad. We don't call it an iPad. We don't talk about the internet and games, and we don't allow the insurance company to tell us what we're going to recommend. Sometimes though, an in-network provider might be great, might be exactly what we want, no problem then. But if it's not, we don't want to just go because that's going to be the easier route. We want to pick the best option for the child. So big takeaways, we do want to focus on this for functional communication. We want to talk about that medical necessity, and we want to justify and provide rationales for everything that we're requesting, the device mounting switches, any of that stuff, rationales for it. We want to talk about a couple different options that were at least considered, and then say why they're not appropriate for kiddo. And we want things to be finite and straightforward. And that's usually going to get you a good takeaway most of the time. Sounds quick.
Thanks, Haley. So because we're running very low on time and I want to respect your time, I'm going to speed through this part about Create Together and the end here, because we want to make sure that I get you to fill out a survey at the end. It's very important. So please hang on till the end at 3 o'clock. And then I may be able to stay on for a few minutes to answer questions, or feel free to put your questions in the chat now. And while I'm talking, Haley and Kim and Tom can respond. And Tom can also give you our emails to make sure you have them, since we won't really have much time to answer too many questions at the end. So Create Together is our 3D. What did you say?
We're going to switch interpreters.
Oh, switch interpreters. Yes.
Yeah.
Tom should be able to do that. All right, so our 3D printing catalog. So one of the things we do in Create Together. So Create Together, really quick, is our 3D printing and fabrication program that Tom heads up and I've been helping with. And it's basically our way of being creative and making things that people couldn't necessarily get otherwise. So we have 3D printers, and Tom's been doing a ton of 3D printing. We have a catalog of things we can just print out immediately. And we also have connections to all kinds of other 3D printers and makers throughout the state. So here are some things we could just print out tomorrow. We have a low-tech AT kit, which includes a nail clipper, a key holder, a stylus, a little universal cuff. We can print reading guides and fork supports. We can print the signature guide for a check, an adaptive nail clipper holder, like I mentioned, a ball stylus, which has a little part at the end to select on a tablet, a touch screen. We have a cabinet handle and a key helper. And these are just some of the things we have the files for. They're all open source and we can just immediately print, but we're also always open to printing new things. We're also constantly making new things. So this is a floor wheelchair that Tom worked on. We're sewing things like these ostomy bag covers and weighted lap pads. We're 3D printing switches. We're working right now on making a zipper connector that's magnetic. We're making all kinds of things. So if there's ever something that you need for a kid that you can't quite figure out how to create, please get in touch with us. and we can talk about it together and hopefully make something. We're connected to lots of engineering students and all kinds of people that are makers around the state and want to be involved. But there's also tons of things that you can make. So you can make what's called page fluffers. So that might be popsicle sticks or something else that makes the pages of a book easier to open. You might be able to make a book more textured just by gluing different textures onto it. You can make things out of Instamorph moldable plastic, which is the picture here on the top right. I'm making all kinds of things with Instamorph. You could make a battery interrupter to turn a battery operated toy into a switch adapted toy. And you can use these industrial twist ties, which are on the bottom, and that might make something easier to use. Haley, do you mind if I skip this for a second and come back to it? Cool. So I just wanted to make sure that you had access to our survey because it is 55 and I want you to have it. So I'm going to put it in the chat, and then Haley's going to talk about AT consults as we say goodbye. So this is a very important survey that we would love for you to do. It's really important to continuing getting funding for our program. I put it in the chat. There's also a QR code here. You can do it right now. That would probably be best, but you can also do it later if you don't have the time at the moment. You might need our names, which is on the screen here, and the topic. I want to just make sure to give you this information since we're going to have to close out in a few minutes to respect your time. I'll leave this up for another couple seconds, and then I'm going to pass it over to Haley to talk about consults for a second. I'll also quickly mention we have a Facebook group for people who are makers or people who might need AT. So if you're someone who's interested in sewing or 3D printing or making things out of PVC pipes, please feel free to join our Facebook group. I'll put the link in the chat for that as well. That's our Create Together Facebook group, and it's just a way for us to share ideas and work on things together. We also have social media, so you can follow us on Facebook at Tekl PA, on Instagram, and on TikTok, which I think is where we can be our most creative. So if you have any pressing questions, please feel free to put them in the comments, but otherwise I'm going to put up this slide about our consoles for Haley.
Yes. So Tekl, we do offer free assistive technology consults for children under 3 who receive their services through Philadelphia IDS. So this was something I think we touched on a little bit earlier, but I just kind of want to go over this in a little bit more detail. So this is not a formal evaluation, but it's really going to be a meeting of the child's team, their family, and all the therapists to really discuss and brainstorm different AT options for a child. And it doesn't just have to be AAC oriented. So please do keep that in mind. A lot of times though, we do get requests for things like adaptive play or tools for eating, things like that as well. So these consults though currently are being done virtually through Zoom, but this has really been highly successful for a lot of our teams and our families. We have noticed that with these virtual appointments that really more team members have been able to attend and participate in the consult than we had previously when we were doing these in person prior to COVID. So it's been great to get more insight from more folks on the team. The only downside is we can't actually let the kiddo play with any of the devices or try out on the spot, but we can demonstrate to the members of the team. So typically this process is once we receive the referral and we schedule, we'll have that virtual meeting. We discuss like the child's background, what's going on, that kind of thing. And then if possible, sometimes kiddo is playing or I get to observe the child while we're having that discussion. That's often great. 2 birds, 1 stone kind of situation. But then we also can maybe have an actual observation of the child too, if possible. Usually though, we do spend most of the time demonstrating different AT or discussing different solutions. Sometimes I have those on hand. Sometimes we look at pictures or more discuss what options we want to. And typically this ends with recommendations to borrow from the lending library. So to try out those different devices. With this service though, we do provide a written visit note summary just so that everybody has the information that can be shared with the other team members and have it for the kiddos' records, especially when they're going into school. so that then they have that information to see, hey, AT was already being considered. Here's what was discussed. So the team doesn't have to start completely over. So if you are interested in something like this for any children on your caseload, you can feel free to email me for the referral form. So just so you know too, these types of consults, we split between myself and then my colleague, Catherine Helland at this point. So you'll hear back from one of us based on availability, and we'd be happy to schedule that. And we actually should be getting a new updated referral form for some of you that might already use this service. We'll have a new one out shortly, hopefully.